Hello, Nick Georgalis here. I am the author of the book God and Wealth, The Rise and Fall of Nations. In this video, I will present the elements of wealth creation. The purpose of any economy is the creation of wealth. Wealth is the only hedge against calamity. Wealth must be continuously created because calamity is inevitable. Any nation or company or individual that fails to continuously create wealth will eventually succumb to calamity. In this video, I will present the elements of wealth creation that comprise an idealized and unencumbered economy, and I will also more fully define wealth. An unencumbered economy is an economy free from government interference and coercion. As I will present in a future video, government has a role to play in the economy. However, the more involved the government is in the economy, the less wealth that is created. The ideal economy consists of individuals, all of whom fear God. The reason we have government and law is because not all men fear God. As the fear of God among men wanes, then the greater is the demand for government, and eventually government becomes the calamity it was intended to guard against. So let's begin now with the elements of wealth creation. First, allow me to define what I mean by unencumbered economy by first defining an economy. An economy is a random aggregation of individuals, each employed according to his self-interest and free will for the purpose of creating wealth for himself. In such an economy, incomes are normally distributed based on the intellectual capacity or productivity of the individuals. Also, in such an economy, everybody's needs and wants are satisfied. The unencumbered economy has no government interference in the form of taxation, spending, or regulations. This then is the starting point for wealth creation. The elements of wealth creation in an unencumbered economy are private property, free will, or in other words, the absence of coercion, intellectual capital, and the fear of God. These elements must be present for the creation of wealth. But before I move on and discuss each of these elements in more detail, I will define wealth. As I mentioned, wealth is the only hedge against calamity, and wealth must be continuously created because calamity is inevitable. Wealth includes assets such as land, buildings, inventory, stocks and bonds, intellectual property, as well as cash in the bank. Wealth also includes progeny. Progeny are a hedge against calamity. Increases in the value of land, buildings, inventory, stocks and bonds, intellectual property, cash in the bank, and progeny is an increase in wealth. Money is not wealth. It is a means of exchange. Wealth is measured in terms of money. Money in the bank is cash, and cash is wealth. When money is withdrawn from the bank to pay for taxes, for instance, there is a reduction in wealth, or in other words, a reduction in an individual's ability to overcome calamity. Wealth is the only hedge against calamity, and thus wealth ensures the survival of the individual and the nation. In the absence of calamity, wealth eases the burden of life. Wealth must be continuously created because calamity is inevitable. An economy must grow continuously and forever. Anything that prevents or interferes with an economy from growing jeopardizes the survival of the economy and the nation. Apart from natural forces and war, the greatest burden on an economy is government. An example of wealth creation is the building of a house. A house protects the owner from the forces of nature and from the forces of other men. The stronger and more opulent the house, the greater protection it offers from calamity. In the absence of calamity, the house eases the burden of life. Profit is wealth creation. Failure to create wealth jeopardizes survival of the individual as well as the nation. In an unencumbered economy, profit results from productivity or efficiency. The first element of wealth creation is private property, and it is essential for the creation of wealth. Private property is securable possession or ownership. It is characterized by physical or legal boundary recognized and respected by others. Private property is subject to violation or trespass. All law is law of property. For example, the act of rape is trespass on the life of the victim. Life is private property. A person's life belongs to the individual, whereas a person's soul belongs to God. A man's life is disposed by man or nature. A man's soul is disposed by God. Private property is subject to a taking by the sovereign under eminent domain. The sovereign taking of the life of a criminal is an exercise of his power of eminent domain, or in other words, the power of eminent domain extends to the taking of all property by the sovereign. The marriage unit is private property. Adultery is trespass on this property. Private property can be tangible or intangible. A patent is an example of intangible private property. An infringement is a trespass on this property. Private property is transferable willingly or unwillingly. The forced taking of one's property by another is stealing, which is an unwilling transfer of property. Taxation is a taking of private property against the will of the individual. Private property is used as collateral for debt. Ownership by the sovereign or the government is not private property. It is instead property held in common. Private property existed at least from the time of the Roman Republic until the collapse of the Western Empire in 476 AD. Without Rome to secure private property, individuals lost their land and their possessions to anyone who could take and secure the land and possessions for themselves. Europe and England evolved into a feudal economy, where ownership of land was determined by the strength and guile of the strong men who emerged after Rome fell. As a result, there was constant warfare. No wealth was created during this period. In the case of England, it was not until after 1066, under William the Conqueror, that titles to land were secured by the king and documented in the Domesday Book. During this period, land was in the hands of nobles and was granted to individuals favored by the king. Serfs and peasants could not own land until the mid-14th century, following the Black Death, which resulted in a massive population decline leading to a labor shortage. The demand for labor then led to wages being paid, and with that an accumulation of wealth among the serfs and peasants. A series of acts were passed by the English Parliament in the 17th and 18th centuries called the Enclosure Laws, which basically enclosed the common areas and allowed anyone, including the serfs and peasants, to purchase the enclosed lands. This marked the end of feudalism in England and the privatization of all lands in England. After this period, England created great wealth and quickly became a world empire, while the rest of Europe remained a feudal economy. This chart shows Britain's population from 1300 to 1901. Note the significant decline in the 14th century resulting from the Black Death. The population did not recover to its pre-Black Death level for over 300 years. Parliament passed the Enclosure Laws, thus creating private property in the 17th and 18th century. This resulted in an exponential increase in population and wealth. This is historical evidence of the connection between private property and the creation of wealth. This chart shows English agriculture from 1250 to 1899. Note that the bushels per acre stayed relatively constant from 1250 to about the 18th century. After the enclosure laws were enacted in the 18th century, productivity grew at a rapid rate. In this example, the introduction of private property in England resulted in the same land producing more wealth. In other words, private property increases the productivity of individuals as well as the productivity of the land. Without private property, no wealth can be created and wealth will be consumed, thus hastening the demise of an economy and the nation. Ideologies that argue against private property and promote some kind of property held in common contain the seeds of their own destruction. The quintessential example is the rise and fall of the former Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, which lacked even a rudimentary system for protecting private property. Free will is also an essential element necessary for the creation of wealth. Free will means the freedom to contract or not contract. The term free enterprise means the freedom to contract. Coercion renders a contract unenforceable under the law. Union contracts, for example, are contracts that are exercised against the will of one of the parties, and such contracts are unenforceable under contract law but for the Wagner Act of 1935, also known as the National Labor Relations Act. This act allows unions to force employers to enter into union contracts against their will. It is the reason many companies move their manufacturing overseas, resulting in the destruction of great wealth. The law and competition impose limits to free will. The limits to free will under the law limits wealth creation by reducing efficiency, as is the case with the National Labor Relations Act. Limits to free will through competition does not limit wealth creation, because competition promotes efficiency. The price of a good or service manifests in competition to supply and competition in demand. Efficiency or productivity determines profit. In a free enterprise and unencumbered economy, prices are determined by competition in supply and competition in demand. Price is independent of cost. This is the reason companies fail, as the price may be below the cost to produce goods or provide services. Price in a free enterprise economy is a measure of human passion, and as such it is an irrational expression of the human psyche. Profit or wealth creation in a free enterprise economy is the result of efficiency, or in other words, productivity. Efficiency and productivity are products of human intellect, or in other words, intellectual capital. Producing profit in a competitive market is the reason chief executive officers are paid high salaries. Profit, therefore, is a measure of human intellect or intellectual capital, and as such it is a rational expression of the human psyche. Unlike socialism and communism, free enterprise allows the full expression of the human psyche, which then contributes to the creation of wealth, thus securing the nation from calamity. The single greatest vulnerability of free enterprise is debt-financed overproduction. The tendency of companies and individuals in a free enterprise system is to overproduce. Overproduction is led by rapid improvements in technology. Overproduction leads to lower prices until the overproduction is consumed and there is little impact on the overall economy. However, in the presence of debt, the reduction in prices due to overproduction reduces revenue. The reduction in revenue makes it difficult to pay back debt. If widespread enough, the inability to pay back debt leads to bank failures, which means the loss of depositors' cash. Assets are sold to make up the loan losses. This is wealth destruction. The drop in asset valuations leads to a drop in investments, and the result is depression. This is what happened during the 1920s in the farm sector, and it led to the 1929 stock market crash. However, government intervention in the economy through tariffs, higher corporate taxes, confiscation of gold, and increased government spending extended the economic downturn leading to the Great Depression. Otherwise, such depressions are short-lived, as happened during the downturn in 1920, where the government did the opposite than what was done in 1932 by reducing taxes, paying off government debt, and reducing regulations and government spending. Short of war or natural disasters, the greatest burden on an economy is government. The role the government plays in the economy determines the burden. When the government's role is that of protector, the economy functions as a free enterprise economy, and there is wealth creation. The wealth creation secures the economy and the nation against calamity. Such an economy has a long life. The protector role is the least burdensome. When the government's role is one of benefactor, the economy is socialist, and wealth creation is consumed. In other words, there is no wealth creation. This makes the economy and the nation increasingly susceptible to calamity. A socialist economy has a shorter life than a free enterprise economy. When the government role is provider, the economy is a communist economy. In other words, the government owns the means of production. A communist economy creates no wealth and consumes wealth. A communist economy is the shortest lived because it is unable to withstand calamity. Under a free enterprise system, prices are determined by supply and demand. The vulnerability is debt financed over production. Under socialism, government interference in the economy causes prices to be independent of supply and demand. The result is shortages and inflation. Under communism, prices are set by the state, and this leads to rationing. Intellectual capital manifests in the average IQ of the population. The higher the average IQ, the greater the national wealth created. The broader the standard deviation, the more likely there will be genius. It is men of genius that moves humanity forward, and it is men of genius who are necessary for the creation of great wealth. A decline in the average IQ and a reduction in the standard deviation, or in other words, a decline in intellectual capital, reduces the likelihood of genius. The lower the likelihood of genius, the less wealth created, and the more susceptible the nation is to calamity. The intellectual capital of a nation can't diminish over time, and when it does, it jeopardizes the nation's ability to create wealth and consequently its ability to survive calamity. The single factor that affects the intellectual capital of a nation is miscegenation or admixture. When there is even a modest level of admixture within a population, the effect on the intellectual capital is profound. The measure of intellectual capital is the intelligent quotient, or IQ. Admixture reduces the average IQ of the population, as well as reducing the standard deviation. The reduction of the standard deviation dramatically reduces the probability of genius. For example, given 1,000 individuals randomly drawn from a cohort with a mean of 100 and a standard deviation of 15, and a second cohort of 1,000 individuals randomly drawn from a population with mean 70 and standard deviation of 9, and adding the IQ of each individual and dividing by 2 to arrive at a third population, then the resulting mean of the third population is 85 and the standard deviation is 12. The next slide graphically illustrates this example. Note the resultant cohort has an IQ that is the average of the means of the component cohorts and a standard deviation that is the average of the standard deviation of the component cohorts. The resultant cohort has a probability of 0.000229% of producing individuals with greater than 140 IQ. Whereas the original cohort 1 has a probability of 0.37% of producing individuals with greater than 140 IQ. In a population of 100 million, the number of individuals with IQ greater than 140 is 370,751 in cohort 1, whereas the number of individuals with IQs over 140 in the resultant cohort is 229, or a reduction of 99%. The result is catastrophic in terms of the creation of wealth and in the ability of a nation to survive calamity. An example of the effect of diminished intellectual capital on a nation is the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. African slaves began to be imported to Rome starting in the 2nd century BC. The decline in the average IQ of the Roman citizen occurred after Rome went from a republic to an empire at about 27 AD. This is evident in the decline in the output and quality of art, literature, and architecture after the end of the republic. Before 100 AD, the total number of notable works was 22, and after 100 AD, the total number of notable works was 16, or a decline of almost 30%. The decline in intellectual capital accelerated after the Edict of Caracalla in 212 AD, which extended Roman citizenship to the sons of slaves and Roman citizens, allowing them to serve in the Roman army. The result of the decline in intellectual capital was the failure to produce men of sufficient genius to manage the empire, leading to the division of the Roman Empire into a Western and an Eastern Empire in 395 AD. A second, more recent example of the effect of the admixture of populations is the decline and fall of the Portuguese Empire. At its peak in the early 19th century, the Portuguese Empire was one of the largest empires in history. It spanned approximately 2.12 million square miles of territory. The importation of a large number of African slaves resulted in the population of Lisbon, 20% African, in the 17th century. The result was a failure of Portugal to produce sufficient genius to sustain the empire, and it is the reason the Portuguese Empire no longer exists. Unlike Portugal, the British Empire did not engage in admixture with those they colonized, and the British Empire continues as a commonwealth into the 21st century. Even in an unencumbered economy, there exists income inequality, although income inequality is greater for encumbered economies. Nevertheless, in the absence of the fear of God, income inequality will engender envy. Envy is the desire that a man not have what he has, including his life and the life of his progeny. Envy is the only human passion proscribed by God in the Ten Commandments. Only the fear of God can suppress envy. Absent the fear of God, envy takes hold in an economy arising from income inequality, leading to rebellion and calamity. The fear of God is essential for the creation of wealth. The French Revolution is the quintessential example where the absence of the fear of God led to a collapse of an economy. The French economy was a feudal economy at the time, and income inequality between the commoner and the aristocracy was great. Nevertheless, this feudal economy continued for hundreds of years because men feared God and there was no envy. The Enlightenment was essentially an atheistic movement, and man no longer feared God. With the onset of the French Revolution, godlessness unleashed envy, giving rise to the Reign of Terror, during which thousands of the aristocracy were killed, including their children. The French Revolution launched Napoleon and the Napoleonic Wars, by which Napoleon sought to take the wealth of his neighbors. These wars devastated Europe, destroying much wealth. The destruction of French aristocracy and its genius during the French Revolution severely limited its ability to create wealth. France never recovered from this disaster and needed the help of God-fearing nations during World War I and World War II. I have shown that the elements of wealth creation are private property, free will, intellectual capital, and the fear of God.